Hello, so we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about modeling. So this would be figure 1 in your final research paper that you're going to be working on apparently from away. So let's get into it. Here's modeling. So you know from the handout that's on your blackboard that's called modeling. It's one of the things that you're supposed to read. That a research question should have 6 kinds of items or tenets. So it should pose significant questions that can be investigated empirically. It should link research to relevant theory. It should use methods that permit direct investigation of the question. It should provide a coherent and explicit chain of reasoning. It should replicate and generalize across studies and disclose research to encourage professional scrutiny and critique. And that's what your final research paper will be, is that you'll be writing this and then we will be encouraging you professionally and critiquing your paper. So the next page of that modeling handout that you all have read and things like that from Blackboard is that there are 3 types of models that we're going to talk about today. So interpretive, which is theoretical in nature, and this modeling you're not going to be really using in its class. So it would be a model for a Marx concept or a Weber concept or a Durkheim concept. And we're not really doing that in this class. We're doing more of a measurement or explanatory model. And measurement and explanatory just sound like what they are. The measurement models focuses on measurements of models. And in figures that you're going to be analyzing, if it has a lot of measurements, direct measurements, then you're going to understand that as a measurement model. And explanatory is a variation of some concepts by changes or variability in other concepts. So if we were talking about Veblen's concept of conspicuous consumption, then that would be more of an explanatory concept. Or if we were talking about sexual assault, and the concepts change or variable on that, then it's going to be explanatory. And if we're talking about measurement models, a lot of the quantitative articles that you've already read are going to be examples of measurement models. To go back, for example, so if we were going to follow the sexualities example all the way through, the concept is sexualities, we're just going to call it sexualities, and then we're going to operationalize it as the number of partners you've had in the last month. And then that would be a measurement of 0, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, etc. And that's how we're going to say that we measure sexualities. So in your studies, for example, if you're doing a content analysis of movies, you're going to have a concept of, let's say, romantic love. So then the nominal label is going to be romantic love, and you're going to operationalize this as they send cards to each other, as an example. And then you're going to measure how many times in that movie they send cards to each other. Or if we had romantic love and you wanted to do violence, right, related to romantic love. So we still have a nominal definition of violence. And then we're going to operationalize this as every time the actor says no in the movie is counting towards violence. So those are all both examples of how we would go from a concept to a measurement. So in your final research paper, you're going to tell us how you went from this concept of, say, sexual assault or violence or interpersonal violence, etc., all the way down to the measurement that you're using to collect your data. So we're going to have 2 examples of building a conceptual measurement model. And then building a conceptual explanatory model. So the first step in building a conceptual measurement model is identifying the key concepts. And then these sub-concepts are called dimensions of the main concept, and the definition concept should contain a nominal definition and an operational definition, just like we saw in the last slide. So this nominal definition uses clear language to define the meaning of a concept as narrowly as possible. And the operational definition provides the rules and mechanisms of measurement that tell how information deemed relevant to the meaning of the concept is extracted from social reality. So again, if we were looking at MC Hammer's videos, and I hired you for a very important job of trying to operationalize MC Hammer videos. We would look at the video and we would say, okay, we see a lot of women who have are just wearing what looks like spandex shorts and bras. And so we would say, okay, we're going to have this rules and mechanisms that every time we see a woman, and we're going to count each woman who's wearing spandex and a bra as representing some kind of gender theory concept, such as the women are underdressed and the men are dressed in baggy pants or something like that. So we would provide the rules and mechanisms to how basically we're coding this MC Hammer video. So conceptual analysis always defines a concept, traces its historical uses and transformations, shows how the concept is embedded in theories, and clarifies and provides operational definitions so the concept can be scientifically evaluated. So I have a paper that is hopefully going to be published in the next couple of months that's looking at this concept that I call statistical consciousness. And statistical consciousness is the idea of using the stats, rightly or wrongly, to make an argument. So my work is mostly in LGBTQ plus stuff, and I in my dissertation I looked at how did lesbian and gay or same-gender couples fill out the census. And so one of the things I'm interested in is how many people do they think in society are identifying as LGBT plus in our society. So my concept is statistical consciousness. I took this from a legal consciousness idea, which is from Anna Marie Marshall at U of I, Urbana-Champaign. She talks about legal consciousness of injustice, but the idea of legal consciousness is the idea that you get hit in a example, you get hit in a car and you jump out and you immediately are like, I'm going to sue you. So you are using legal words to describe something, rightly or wrongly, related to your car getting hit. So Dr. Marshall at U of I talks about sexual harassment in academics, right? So she asks staff and faculty how they define sexual harassment, and in those examples, all the sexual harassment definitions are incorrect. And so she's again saying, well, this is basically like people not following through, and that's where she gets the injustice part of legal consciousness of injustice. But they're also using legal words to say basically like that's really not sexual harassment. That's people being people, that's men being men, all this kind of stuff. So this concept, statistical consciousness, is embedded in this idea, in these theories about legal consciousness, and I'm providing an operational definition by looking at when people read scenarios, how many gay or lesbian people do they think are living near them. And I found that people overestimate by, for example, 12% by using census scenarios that state basically like the number of people of same gender households have increased, and in this way this is demonstrating that whatever journalism people write about the stats, whether there's increases or decreases, etc., plays out in the idea of statistical consciousness. Alright, so we are now going to have three components of working measurement hypothesis, which is part of your methodology. So you want to explain the pattern in the data stated as a shape pattern of covariation among the indicators of the concept. If indicators are measuring the same concept, there should be observed covariation among them. So when you're playing soda pong, right, with your parents, this basically states that you have the sociological knowledge to be able to determine what you should expect from this data. So we know that college campuses space, right, is conducive to sexual assault. So lots of people drinking who may be living on their own for the first time at parties, and lots of places where people can sexually assault away from the public and stuff like that. So if you're looking at sexual assault, you can state that if there's lots of areas, as that article suggested, if there's lots of areas that have spaces where people can go away and not be seen, this might increase sexual assault on college campuses. If the college is known as a party college, right? This might you might suspect from your knowledge, right, that the pattern would be that there would be increases of sexual assault on that college campus. So the second part of the working hypothesis is you need an operational definition. So this needs to be stated as a means of creating evidence on the value an indicator has for different units of analysis. This is basically saying the unit of analysis could be individuals, households. So the example I used with the LGBT people, that would be individuals, because I'm individually asking folks about what percentage they think of LGBT plus people are living in the area. If you were doing organizations, so like one of the articles in the textbooks talks about the number of resources available to people who've been sexually assaulted, right? That would be the resources available, or the organizations from those resources that are available would be the unit of analysis. So in your working hypothesis that you are providing for 3, right, you want to make sure that you understand what the unit of analysis is and include that as part of your write-up. And the third is that you want definitions that need to be clear enough definitions of latent concept, so operational definitions can be derived as measures that capture the content of the abstract concept. It should be theoretically informed, part of a link to a social theory or paradigm. So this is basically going from the concept all the way down to the measurement. So in your methods section of your final paper, you want to demonstrate to the graders that you understand the concept all the way down to the measurement related to your working hypothesis. Now we're turning to the measurement model. So the measurement model is a concept can be defined and measured as outlined by the model. You gather the data in the proposed measurement model, and then you have 3, in this case for this class, 3 working measurement hypotheses, and can be tested to determine if the measurements do represent the concept. So you could do a pre-test or a post-test. So if you're doing a content analysis of a movie, right, you and a partner maybe would want to go through the movie. We'll first have a discussion about what you're going to code for and how that relates to the theory, and then sit there and go through like 5 or 10 minutes of the movie, and both of you code, and then you come together and you look at did we code the same and all this kind of stuff, so that you were testing to see if those measurements that you have constructed, because you're the researcher of your project, meet really what the concepts you're getting at. So an example in the handout that you have, right, is multiculturalism. So they have the definition as a collection of attitudes or dispositions toward culturally diverse objects, particularly people encountered in the social world. And they have the dimensions of awareness of diverse cultural knowledge, degree of tolerance, racism expressed toward culturally diverse people, and the degree of ethnic, racial, cultural heterogeneity of friendship networks. So before we continue, we want to look at latent variables and manifest variables. Latent variables are, it takes more than one item to know what that means. So faith would be an example of a latent variable. Another example would be interpersonal violence. We don't know automatically what that means, so we need multiple indicators to determine what that means. So latent variables are abstract enough that they require multiple indicators to measure them, and they cannot be observed directly. So multiculturalism is an example of latent variables. Racial apathy is an example of latent variables. Yes, that's all I can think of for examples. As opposed to manifest variables. So manifest variables are, you basically know by observation what that means. So age, for example, you can guess approximately what age I am based off of my hair color and my wrinkles and things like that. Gender can be a manifest or a latent variable. So typically, a lot of times we can look at a person and we assume what their gender might be, but we all know that gender is socially constructed, so you can make that a latent variable also if you're researching gender fluid people. Another example of that could be manifest or latent depending on your perspective as a researcher would be race. So we know that race is socially constructed. However, a lot of times we look at a person and we determine, or we think we determine, what their race is. So again, manifest means that you can typically observe it, whereas latent takes multiple indicators to get at what you mean. So now we're moving to an explanatory model. And again, this is in your handout, so you want to refer to that handout called modeling. This is causal models. You have the concepts have been defined analytically, and you create working hypotheses about relationships among concepts. Remember, the measurement model, which is the majority of what people will be doing in this class, is the relationships between the measurements, right? And this one is relations among the concepts. So if we have an explanatory hypothesis, then we have some of the same things that we had in a measurement model. So we want to first determine from our knowledge how the concepts are going to function. So is it if we're looking at conspicuous consumption and scarcity in this time of coronavirus, right? We want to look at the concept of conspicuous consumption, and we're going to think that people are going to go out and stock up because of the rule of scarcity, that if you see something flying off the shelf like toilet paper, you should buy 12 packages of 12 rolls of toilet paper, because you don't want to always have toilet paper, right? We also should be able to see conspicuous consumption, a decline in concepts of displaying wealth to other people, right? Because now we have social distance and social isolation to not spread the virus. That would be an example of, from your sociological knowledge, of how you explain the pattern of two concepts. So the second one is the mechanism. There needs to be stated in the working hypothesis mechanism that can link the variability in the two variables. One must specify how the causal influence is exerted. And the third tenet is the mechanism pattern data expectations should be derived from a more general social science theory. So the example I gave of conspicuous consumption is definitely derived from a general social science theory. But if you were doing an explanatory working hypothesis about sexual assault, this would have sexual assault linking to another concept, and you would want to discuss how the one independent variable causes the dependent variable in this example, and they would all be concepts.